Today's record is a brand new release of something old and previously unreleased. And it comes from the time of the flavor unit, the transition from the original flavor unit to the second generation flavor unit. Most of you guys watching this are probably already hip to the story of the flavor unit, but just in case, here's a quick rundown. The flavor unit originally is a group of MCs associated with DJ Mark the 45 King. That includes guys like Lakim Shabazz, Lord Alabaski, Double J, Chill Rob G, and they had one album as a unit, the flavor unit, really pretty classic album on Tufts Crew Records, including the massive posse cut flavor unit of Assassination Squad, but lots of other hits, lots of dope stuff. Guys like Apache are on here, Queen Latifah, of course, who soon will become a key figure in the transition. Now, while the flavor unit only released one album as a whole crew united together, they released a whole bunch of projects on all different labels, Tough City, of course, but also Wild Pitch, Tommy Boy, etc., and they were all unified by the fact that they were all produced largely, if not entirely, by DJ Mark the 45 King. They were his crew. Now, unfortunately, it seems like DJ Mark was starting to have some trouble with drugs. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but what that meant was that his involvement was dissipating, the crew then was perhaps falling apart, and it was really just one of the members, Queen Latifah, stepping up and deciding to hold the crew together, which brought in the second phase, which in that sense is very commendable. But unfortunately, in doing so, she also really turned it into her own thing, which was starting to become very removed from what was the original flavor unit. I mean, for one thing, the signature sound of the flavor unit is DJ Mark the 45 King, and if you don't have DJ Mark the 45 King's production, I'm really tempted to say it's just not the flavor unit. You know, it's just not that sound, it's not that style, but then, just as crucially, the original flavor unit members, most of them, if we're not completely sort of dropped off and left to the side, were at least marginalized and kind of pushed to the side in favor of artists that Queen Latifah was down with and promoting. Most notably, of course, that would be Naughty by Nature, who become huge all of their, on their own accord. But that also meant people like Zane, which was an R&B group, and the Almighty RSO, who kind of got in there because of their weird Dave Mays connection, and and then they had like the big posse cut, which featured all sorts of like big name artists like D Nice and Heavy D, and I mean, nothing against these guys. I mean, she brought in Freddie Fox, and anytime you bring Freddie Fox into a crew, that can't be a bad move. But it's just really not the flavor unit as we knew and grew to love them over the previous years. So it really shifted the focus to, of course, Naughty by Nature all day, every day, but guys like Rotten Rascal, Zane, and people like Chill Rob G and Lakim Shabazz were seemingly out. I mean, they were in on the fringes at the very beginning. Lakim Shabazz has a guest appearance on Naughty by Nature's first album, and Latee, one of the original Flavor Unit MCs, had a song on the second Flavor Unit album. So there are little hints and touches of the original Flavor Unit. But really, except for Queen Latifah, Apache is the only other guy who really got his push. And he wound up having a huge hit with Gangsta Bitch and really became a strong element of the second tier Flavor Unit. But otherwise, the crew was pretty well replaced with a whole new bunch of people. Of course, now if that wasn't bad enough, years later, when guys like Naughty by Nature and all had sort of moved on, Queen Latifah brought out a whole new third flavor unit with a whole bunch of new MCs and new groups, and they just called themselves The Unit, and she put out a whole collective album of them, and most of them seemed to be pretty terrible, and I think, nobody had really invested much interest in most of them. But so, as bad as sort of that first flavor unit, washing them out and bringing a whole new crew was, and such a sort of a tragedy, because there were really some great artists and a great sound that was lost in that. It actually happened a second time, which was even worse. But that's really, now we're drifting off besides the topic, because this video is actually about one of the lost MCs, one of the MCs that sort of got, again, lost in the wash, Latee. Like a lot of the original flavor unit, Latee is one of those MCs whose catalog is just too depressingly small. He had two really dope classic hits. This Cut's Got Flavor and No Tricks, both on Wild Pitch Records in the late 80s, of course produced by DJ Mark the 45 King. And yes, by the way, these are represses. I'm cheap. It's the When MCs Had Skills repress series that Wild Pitch released in the 90s. And those two singles and the Flavor Unit song really practically sum up the entire catalog of Latee. Not quite, because he did a song with DJ Mark again in the 2000s, and he had one song, a very rare, very highly sought after song called Brainstorm, on one of the many very small run DJ Mark the 45 King EPs he put out. It's called Brainstorm. And now Brainstorm has actually become over the years sort of a very sought after classic, and it's been repressed a couple of times, and we've got one of those represses here. So it's just on one of these 45 King EPs, which feature a whole bunch of artists. Double J's crew is on here, the Maniac Mob, there's some R&B stuff, and Latee's Brainstorm, which is a really dope cut. And unfortunately, that was the whole story until 2011, when someone put up online a Latee demo, which featured one track, Who Rips the Sound, which was really pretty dope and really taken off. And now leave it to Diggers with Gratitude to find that demo, remaster the whole thing, go back, find Latee, and come up with a killer EP of that entire demo. Press it on wax. Bam. Who Rips the Sound EP, 2012. Just came out, just arrived in the mail the other day. Wow, sticker cover. Limited to 275 copies, 100 of which are on red vinyl, the rest are on black, all hand numbered. Mine is number WVW. Hey, that's me! And in recovering this material, DWG actually found out the story of what this demo is, and it's not his earliest material. It doesn't predate everything he's released before. It's actually from 91, 92, and it's the pieces of what would have been his album on Epic with the new flavor unit had they not dropped the ball on him. So now you might debate whether this is really an EP or a 12-inch single or what. Basically, you've got 4 complete, full, proper songs, 4 interludes, and an intro and an outro, which were essentially just 2 more interludes. And what the interludes are instrumentals, not full length, maybe like a minute and a half or so, of beats that would have been the other beats for his album. These are incomplete songs. They were going to be used for his album had he finished his album, but they weren't recorded at all. So there's only the 4 songs and the 6 interludes. And altogether, that would have been probably pretty much the whole album. As with all Diggers releases, this record comes with a press sheet, which gives you some back information on the EP and the story and on the label, and even shouts me out, hey. But what's interesting is they don't give you complete, proper production credits. They tell you you've got some production by Lakim Shabazz, which is interesting, an unnamed DITC producer, and a little touch of magic from the 45 King. And they say we're going to leave these production credits vague intentionally, which I assume means maybe there's somebody who wasn't paid and there's some legal question there, so they don't answer it. So we're not really sure exactly who produced what. Oh, and if you ordered this from DWG directly, you also got a nice glossy photo of Latee himself. So how is it? It's dope, it's some classic 90s stuff, but it's also somewhat in a way disappointing. And not just disappointing in the fact that the interludes haven't been turned into finished songs, although how cool would it have been if the album had actually been finished and released and properly mastered and everything like that. But even aside from that, it's got, again, that really sort of vintage early 90s sound that sounds really pretty dope. But let's face it, this is not Latee with the 45 King, no tricks really. This is Latee in what would have been second generation flavor unit stuff, which is good, which is dope, and he certainly would have been better than some of the stuff that did come out on the flavor unit in those days, but it's not the best Latee in my opinion. And part of that too is just, frankly, one of the weaknesses, and I say this, with a lot of love because the flavor unit is great, and they released so many dope classic records, but one of the weaknesses, perhaps a lot of the MCs of the crew, is that the MCs were dope because of the choices they made, because of the production they came, because of the style they bought, but not necessarily because they are the most amazing, brilliant lyricists. And so when you take Latee and subtract 45 King, you subtract that style, you subtract that classic flavor unit sound, you've got an MC who's good because he still comes with a deep voice and a hard flow, but he's not necessarily the most mind-bending lyricist. In fact, when you compare him to someone like Tretch from Naughty by Nature, he really sounds pretty old school and possibly dated. In a way that's good, but on the other hand, you can see how had this album been finished and released, it probably would not have been a huge success. It wouldn't have been a big commercial success, which, I'm sure Queen Latifah was actually really starting to gun for at that period with her own stuff and with Naughty by Nature and all that. But even with sort of the more underground, serious heads, it wouldn't have been as good as, say, Crazy Like a Fox, I don't think, which was also not released. It would have been appreciated and respected by the fans who are really holding on to the name of Latee, and the fans who are really just looking to see any original flavor unit MC actually get an album released through the flavor unit, which would have included myself in those days. Oh, thank God, at least one of the flavor units actually still here. It's not just D-Nice and all these other guys. No offense to D-Nice, I like a lot of D-Nice records, but let's face it, he's not the flavor unit. But Latee wasn't the illest lyricist, and it doesn't feature 45 King production, so it would have been a nice, cool album, just like one for the crates, one for the collection, another album that's good but not amazing, with some cool early 90s production style, which probably would be appreciated more today than at the time, and with some MCing, which is good, but not great. And that's really what this EP is too. Now we do have some nice beats on here, don't get me wrong. I don't want to take it too far in the other direction and start putting this down. This is a dope EP with some really nice dusty horn samples, crunchy breaks, really great early 90s sound. That if you like that sound, you're going to love this EP. This is really right up your alley. But now let's talk about the 4 finished songs. The first track is one we'd already heard online, Who Rips the Sound. It's the one they titled the EP after. It's easily the best track on here. It is a little bit of a posse cut. It features 2 guest MCs, Prince Laquan and E Marvelous, but they all hold their own. The beat is the best. It's just some ill flows. This would have been probably the standout cut of the whole album. Then you've got 2 message songs, which are pretty good, but definitely heavy-handed. You've got Not My Style and Hard Times, which is better of the 2, I think, if only for the beat. And then finally, interestingly, you've got Brainstorm, the OG version. So it's actually an alternate mix, apparently, of this. They call it the original mix, so presumably it came first. Although, frankly, it's really cool to hear this other version, and it is dope, but for my money, I prefer the original, in the sense the one that we're familiar with, the one from the 45 King EP. Even if it didn't come first, I say it's definitely the best. I'm going to play clips of both, though, so you can decide for yourselves.
With so much energy, I vibrate the ground. Lyrically spoken, just enough to have you choking. The technique I use is so effective, I'll be stroking. I sink down deep into the crevices, concocting concepts that contain cleverness. My method is madness, just like a maniac. Intellectually, I sketch like a brainiac. I go round for round, pound for pound. So tell me who rips the sound when the chips are down? Who rips the sound when the chips are down? Can you rip the sound when the chips are down? Yeah, I can rip the sound when the chips are down. We go round for round and go pound for pound. A lot of brothers let buggers saying I ain't go yet. To go goal is merely only one goal set. For your info, I set my heights much more higher than the platinum status. Yes, right. So I don't give a fuck about the chart you top. And nobody's even checking for the weak ass shit you pop. I kick the slum for the folks where I come from and make them boogie to them like the Naughty Boys anthem. But you don't have to jump or pump your fist or none of that. Instead, nod your head when we pump the track. Cause I'm strictly non-commercial, official. Hip-hop's the issue when you slide, take the happy rap with you. Beat it, hit the road, we don't need it. Only the real hip-hop fans remain seated. I'll get you jumping out your seats until the aisles make the crowd go wild. Cause that's my style. Would you disrespect the black queen? Nah. Would you sell to a crack? Nah, what you bugging on, kid? Would you sell your whole soul for the sake of going gold? Nah, that ain't me, dude. Nah, that's not me. Do you envy the next man? What? Well, they'll be singing on your next jam. Chill. Nowadays, a lot of kids make jams that sloppy. They lack self-respect. The young ones, they carry text, not intellect. Weak is the one who preys on the innocent, and he's also the one without the knowledge that is infinite. So, due to the cracks and crazies, babies are rapidly pushing up daisies. The black men, they're packed and they're trapped in jails, caught in a system that's designed for us to fail. Step forward, there's no time to trip before, because you can't start a law without all of y'all. A foolish man doesn't take heed, and he thinks that he can fool this man and succeed. But for knowledge itself, I'm up to bomb like a stealth. Mentally fit and an excellent health. You got a short fuse, but you're just a dud. Keep popping, and I'ma commence to dropping my studs. All your patriots better not waste your shots. Against me, you gotta bring all the weight you got. I represent the strong, black, and militant, uplifted, young, gifted, intelligent. relevant, but what this fella meant, see, I'm smart, and if you're pussy, I'll stomp you like an elephant. And follow up and hit you with some hard rhymes. You can't score mine, cause we're living in hard times. Brainstorm, better run for shelter. Yo, it's not my fault if you're caught, cause you felt the first drop, but that was just a warning. Now before I stepped in, the crowd was yawning. You're stalling, falling asleep, you must have been. Better wake up when you feel a strong gust of wind, cause at times I am the light that shines with knowledge to generate intelligent minds. But then sometimes I feel gloomy and gray with no same intelligent minds fall straight. But why waste time on the snowflakes when I can rock flavorful styles with the king on the slow break? You heard my takes, so now you know. Lyrically I estimate more power than Hurricane Hugo. Batting your hatches in practice, you're still in a shake and vibrate when the DJ scratches. Perhaps it might collapse, fall in the laps of the saps who lack but think they rock the ruggedest rap. Poor chaps who can't adapt, need to chill or get kicked in the grill with the back of my boot heel.
Yo, Latee, time to change like the weather, baby. Time to get that mind-blowing brainstorm. You know what I'm saying?
When I get a brainstorm, you better run for shelter. It's not my fault if you're caught, cause you felt the first drop, but that was just a warning. Now before I stepped in, the crowd was yawning. You're stalling asleep, you must have been. Wake up when you feel a strong gust of wind, cause at times I am the light that shines with knowledge to generate intelligent minds. But then sometimes I feel gloomy and gray when no same intelligent minds fall straight. But why waste time on the snowflakes when I can rock the flavorful styles of a slow break? Wait, you heard my tape, so now you know. Lyrically I estimate more power than Hurricane Hugo. Batting your hatches in practice, you're still in a shake and vibrate when my DJ scratches. Perhaps I might collapse and fall in a lap of the sets who lack but think they rock the ruggedest rap. Poor chaps who can't adapt need to chill or get kicked in the grill with a shoe heel. For real, yo, I get heated, I get hot, now I'm burning up. You wonder why the dead bodies keep turning up? Cause brothers die when they test the lie, ended up on their backs, flat face in the sky. I let the lightning strike with the mic, you loosen up your bolts, hit you with 1,000 volts.
So there you go, the last remaining elements of an album that I almost want to say was stolen from us. Given a proper press release, a chance to hear what had almost completely passed us by. Perhaps not as perfect as it would have been had, the stars properly aligned and he'd done it a few years earlier with Mark the 45 King and everything had been finished and completed, but it's just great to have these last remaining remnants of this album rescued and preserved. And Latee's far too tiny catalog almost doubled, giving us more really dope tracks from an MC who we didn't get to hear enough from. So until next time, this is Werner Von Wanrod saying peace out.